Yeah, so there's one of the fables is a guy's going on a journey. He comes to a bridge. Another guy's walking across the bridge, and the hero of the story is trying to get where he's going to go. He's got a vision for his life, and the other guy comes up, hands him a rope, and then jumps over, and then basically holds him hostage. So I'm
Hmm.
not, the guy's like, I'll help pull you up, and the guy, the hanger, is saying, no, you'll just hold on, and these are these moments where you realize you're in a hostage situation, where
Hmm.
the other person is basically saying, if you don't, you're emotionally responsible for me, and you're like, I'm your problem, and it's not that I'm your problem in the way that God expects. So a husband's the head of his home; he's responsible for his household. It's not that; it's actually I'm denying. The person who's holding hostage, the hostage taker, is saying, your my emotional state is entirely up to you, but it's not really up to you. I'm denying all agency, and I'm going to hold you hostage. And
Hmm.
and you see that in all sorts of places. You can see it in extended families. With the example I used the other day in the sermon, was this is how the trans movement operates. The
Hmm.
question, would you rather have a dead son or a living daughter, is a
Hmm.
great example of someone saying, here. So you have you have a boy, parents, have a son, and he's been groomed into gender ideology and now is convinced he's a girl. And the activists will come and say, look, mom, dad, you need to get on board with this. And if you don't, you're going to end up with a dead son.
Hmm.
And so if you don't want a dead son, you better accept your new living daughter, and you better pay for the surgeries and the hormone blockers and everything else. And it's basically a hostage situation. It says, mom and dad, this is, if they do something, if they kill themselves, it's your fault. It's your fault.
Yeah.
And what are they doing? They're playing on the parents' compassion. Here,
Hmm.
parents are compassionate. God designed them to be, as a father has compassion on his children, so shall the Lord have compassion on you. Shall a mother forget her nursing child? Shall she fail to have compassion on the child of her womb? These are biblical texts that say, fathers and mothers are exhibit A of compassion and empathy and pity and whatever word you want to use. And so that also means there's a danger that they can be manipulated by it, and clever, ungodly agents will figure out how to exploit it.
Hmm. So let's make this grounded and practical then. So not everyone's going to be dealing, although someone listening may be dealing with this exact situation with the trans son, the dead son, living daughter. But it seems like everyone has at least one situation probably in their lives where someone has thrown the rope around them and says, now you are responsible for me, and if you don't do what I say, then the hostage gets it, and I happen to be the hostage.
Right.
So like how can men and women too, how can they spot these situations when they're coming, and how can they in the moment wield the righteous no, or what is the right response in that?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things is first getting clear. So recognizing when it's happening is often a matter first of becoming more aware of your own passions.
Okay.
So because oftentimes, paying attention to your own hesitations, reluctances, aversions, your angers, your anxieties, because oftentimes we intuitively are aware of the social environment. We know what's expected of us when you go home for Christmas. You know that there's certain people, certain topics you stay away from, certain things when people get agitated, you just kind of begin to maneuver around. So we all
Mm-hmm.
do this sort of intuitively and naturally to avoid relational pain. Basically, we want to avoid the
Mm-hmm.
emotional pain, relational pain, and we get very adept at dodging. So the first step is becoming aware of when you're doing that automatically. When are you ducking? When are you avoiding? And you can tell that by your own passions. Here's the thing I could say in this moment that would set everybody off. And then you have to ask, okay, am I doing that because of wisdom? Because there's an issue that needs to be addressed, but now's not the right time. But I'm going to address it later. Or am I doing so out of cowardice? I don't want to deal with it. I'm fearing man. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's how you diagnose when you're doing it. That's one of the key ways you diagnose. Then it's getting more clear on the nature of responsibility. What does God act? Who are you responsible for, and how? How are you responsible for it? So your first and fundamental responsibility is for yourself. You stand before God, and you're responsible to Him for you. You're responsible for your emotions, your attitudes, You're responsible for your actions, for your words, for your deeds. You'll give an account for every bit of it to the Lord. He's the one you're responsible to him. Then if you're in leadership, you're also responsible for those under you, but you're not to blame for everything under you. So you're responsible, which means you need to address it. But part of, like if you're a pastor of a church, you're going to be held account for what happened in your congregation. But what that doesn't mean is every sin in your congregation will be imputed to you. What it means is when you discovered or saw the sin, when you saw that issue, what did you do? Did you lean in? Did you address it? Did you rebuke, correct, exhort? Did you use the word? Did you bring it to bear? That's what you'll be held responsible for, your actions and what you ought to do. And they'll be held responsible for what they did. And so this is like with Adam and Eve, right? Eve sinned, but when God, both of them sinned. Eve sinned first, but when God showed up, he wanted to talk to Adam. Why? Because Adam was the head. Adam, where are you? I want to talk to you because you're responsible for the whole thing. I gave you the law of the garden. You were responsible to teach it to your wife and to, make sure she knew what the law of the garden was. And then you were responsible to guard and protect this place from evil. Now you're naked. Now you've clothed yourself. Who told you that you were naked? Why are you hiding? So he wants to talk to Adam because Adam's the head. But that doesn't mean that Eve can say, well, if Adam's the head, I don't have any responsibility here. No, that's not true. Eve's responsible for herself. So that blame shifting thing that all humans want to do, we want to offload blame, offload responsibility to others, is the thing that you have to lean in with. You have to say, no, I'm responsible for certain things, but not for other things. And so that's what prevents the hostage situation.
Can you speak a word of encouragement into men who are experiencing this currently in their lives, and they know with their families or their workplaces or their friends that if they say the thing, everything will blow up, and they will get blamed for the explosion because everything was going along just fine, quote unquote, before, and then you had to go and say the thing, and now all of this chaos, now it's all on you.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we know in our hearts that's false, but can you speak a word of encouragement to men that are facing situations like that?
Yeah, this is where courage is needed. So you get clear on what's happening, get clear on it. So that means someone can be the occasion for a blow up and not the cause of the blow up. So when Paul's, in the book, I talk about Paul in the book of Acts, and everywhere Paul goes, there's a mob. And so the optical illusion that can result from that is Paul causes mobs. And it's actually, Paul is preaching the gospel. What's happening is his opponents are following him around, and everywhere he goes, they lie, they slander, they stir up mobs in order to oppose him. This is an effective means of trying to put a damper on the gospel proclamation. So if you were to say, yeah, Paul causes mobs, you're like, no, you're not seeing it clearly. It's his opponents that are causing the mobs. They're behind the scenes pulling they're puppet masters. They know how to stir people up. They know how to use slander and false accusations in order to steer people. And they're doing it, and so there's the mob. And what Paul's refusing to do is he's refusing to be cowed by the mob. He's not backing down from the mob. He sees the mob as an opportunity to be faithful, to preach the gospel. And so you got to get clear on, if I say this, I may be lighting a match, but you ought to be able to light matches. Okay? The issue is somebody else has been pumping gas into this room, and that's what's going to blow up. But it's the person that's pumping the gas that's responsible for it, not me. So I'm going to own my words, but my words ought to be not, my words are not, if you're speaking the truth, then it ought to be uncontroversial. If you, in heaven, if you said what you said, would the angels react? That sort of question, right? Would the saints who have been made righteous, if you said whatever thing that you're going to say in the setting, would they approve it or disapprove it? That's how you should calibrate yourself. What does God think about this? What does the word say? That's the true calibration. Then it's, okay, now in this context, I'm going to say it and it's going to be uncomfortable. And then you're ready to deal with the blowback. So you're going to do it, and that's where you have to steel yourself with, I know what God thinks, I know who I am, I'm seeking his approval, I'm going to speak plainly and clearly, I'm going to be master of myself. God's restored control of me to me. I'm self-controlled and sober-minded. My passions aren't running amok inside, so I'm going to take this blowback knowing that it's coming, and I'm going to try to lead through it. That's what God calls leaders to do.
So I asked first about men because I think courage and disagreeableness, to use a Jordan Peterson word, is something that's very inherent to men. We're supposed to be disagreeable. Combat, battle is disagreeable. But I think one of the things we're also facing today is women having the need to be disagreeable about particularly sins about feminism, for example, that show up within families and manipulation. And so I've spoken to a number of women that see many things going wrong within their families, within their friend groups, and they want to speak into it. But women aren't maybe necessarily characterologically designed, made to be disagreeable in that way. Can you speak a word of encouragement to women as well in this regard?
Yeah, so we definitely see. So while women are not designed by God to be frontline fighters,
Yeah.
when battles are, Lewis said, battles are ugly when women fight, and then he still gave Susan that bow and arrow. So in Narnia, Lewis, Father Christmas tells Susan, battles are ugly when women fight. You're not supposed to be in the front lines, but there are times when everything's coming apart where you're going to need that bow and arrow. You're going to need that dagger. And so there is a place, and all women ought to be women of courage. Sarah in the Bible is a model of courage. So in First Peter, we're told, be like the holy women who hoped in God. Be like Sarah, who submitted to Abraham, calling him Lord, who did good and did not fear anything that was frightening. So that fear, a woman could say, this is going to be awkward in my friend group if I bring up, but this is wrong. God doesn't, this is false. This is not true to the scriptures. Yes, it will be awkward. And there's a hurdle that you have to get over because of the agreeableness, the natural female agreeableness. But faithfulness demands it. It's still, do you care what God thinks or do you care what man thinks? Are you seeking to be approved by the world, by your friends, or are you going to be approved by the Lord? That's the fundamental thing that you've got to get straight and you've got to anchor yourself in.